everyone. Can you hear me?
No.
No? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. My name is Aldona and I work at Lawyers for Human Rights, and I will be talking to you today about immigration detention. I am going to briefly touch on the three factors that have worsened immigration detention over the last few years, and then I'm going to talk about the law surrounding immigration detention, and then finally I will discuss the interventions that LHR has taken to try to decrease immigration detention in South Africa. As Lindo has already discussed, one of the key factors that is and continues to affect immigration detention is the failed asylum system. So due to the fact that people cannot access documentation from the refugee reception offices or from the online system, it leaves them without documentation and puts them at risk of arrest whenever they leave their houses. I'm not going to discuss the asylum system again because Linda Puhle touched on that. So I'm going to discuss the other two factors that have worsened immigration detention over the past couple of years. The first is the COVID-19 pandemic. So the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in all of the Home Affairs offices being closed. They were closed indefinitely because we didn't know then when the lockdown would end. So when the refugee reception offices were closed, the Department of Home Affairs issued a blanket extension on the permits of asylum seekers and refugees. However, this extension must have not filtered down to the police stations because they continued to arrest people when their permits expired. So despite the extension, if a person presented their permit and the date had expired, they would be arrested either way. And this arrest was unlawful, but many of these people did not have access to legal representation, so they would be held, often without appearing in court, and other times they would have to pay bribes to be released from the police stations. In 2021, as Lindo mentioned, the online renewal system was introduced, but that system has been plagued with a lot of issues. Most of the time, a person will get a response after sending a couple of emails, but there are instances where our clients don't hear back from Home Affairs. And so even when they try to renew their permits before their current permit expires, there's no guarantee that they will be able to renew their permits, putting them at risk of being detained either way. The refugee reception offices did open in May 2022 to new asylum applications and general inquiries that asylum seekers and refugees had. But the RROs are unfortunately operating on an appointment basis, which is unfortunately very inefficient. There's no cap to the number of appointments that the refugee reception office gives. So often, once they reach their quota for the day, many people will be turned away and they'll have to return to the RROs multiple times before they receive permits. So from this, you can see how difficult it is for asylum seekers and refugees to renew their permits. And without valid permits, that puts them at grave risk of being detained by the police or by immigration officials. The second factor that has exacerbated immigration detention is xenophobia. Xenophobia has been an issue in South Africa for a very long time, and every now and again, xenophobic, what do you call them? These xenophobic events pop up, and they kind of take over South Africa and cause a lot of problems. I'm sure many of us remember the xenophobia that took place in 2008 That was a very scary time to be a foreigner, and I know because I am a foreigner. So yeah, xenophobia is a very big issue, especially today. We've seen it playing out with groups like Operation Tudula, going to residences and shops that are known to be operated by foreigners and raiding them, looting them, attacking these people, and just subjecting them to very terrible treatment. But unfortunately, xenophobia is not only occurring within groups in the society, it is also becoming institutionalized, which means that we are seeing xenophobia play out in state institutions, such as the healthcare sector, the South African Police Service, the social development sector as well, and the labor sector, as Lindu discussed. So we have police officers frequenting places that are known to house a lot of immigrants and arresting them on a weekly basis, knowing that they will definitely find people there who don't have valid documentation. And you'll find that many of the times when people are arrested, they are not charged. They're just held for an indefinite period, or they might be made to pay a bribe to be released. But it's unfortunate that many people who are arrested end up not appearing before the court, and therefore have their right to access the courts violated. So that is the context of immigration detention. I'm now going to talk about the law governing immigration detention. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the Constitution. Importantly, the rights in the Constitution, most of the rights in the Constitution, are available to everyone who resides in the borders of South Africa. So that means whether a person entered the country through a recognized port of entry, or whether they entered the country illegally, I don't like to use that word, but illegally, they must still be protected by the rights in the Constitution. As long as someone is within the borders of South Africa, every right that applies to everyone in the Constitution applies to them. Importantly, for immigrants who have been detained, Section 34 and 35 of the Constitution are key. They state that anybody who has been detained has the right to challenge the lawfulness of their detention in front of a court of law, and that they must be brought before a court of law if they've been arrested within 48 hours of their arrest. Unfortunately, this 48-hour period is routinely violated. You'll find that people are held at police stations for days before they're finally brought before a court. The next piece of legislation that I'm going to discuss is the Immigration Act. So the Immigration Act and the Refugees Act are the two main pieces of legislation that govern the regularization of immigrants. So the process of immigrants becoming legal in South Africa. The Immigration Act provides a number of temporary and permanent visas that immigrants coming into South Africa can access. The Immigration Act allows immigration officials and police officials to arrest illegal foreigners. That is the term that is used in the Immigration Act, but we do not like that term because it has very negative connotations. So when I use that term, I'll be using it in the context of the Immigration Act. But the Immigration Act allows police officers to arrest an illegal foreigner, and an illegal foreigner is defined as a person who is in the country illegally. So that means they don't have valid documentation governing their stay in South Africa. The Immigration Act also allows officials to detain any person for 48 hours to verify their documentation status with Home Affairs. If they fail to verify the person's identity within the 48 hours, they have to release them. And then finally, the Immigration Act allows officials to detain illegal foreigners for the purposes of deportation. So if a person is found to be in the country illegally, they can be deported back to their country of origin. On the other hand, we have the Refugees Act, which is the main piece of legislation that governs refugees and asylum seekers. According to the Refugees Act, any person who is in the asylum system or intends to enter the asylum system should not be arrested for entering the country legally or being in the country illegally. So what we've often noticed is that the Refugees Act and the Immigration Act, which should be read together, are not read together, and police officers tend to focus only on the Immigration Act, which says that an illegal foreigner must be arrested and then deported. But unfortunately, a lot of asylum seekers, if the Refugees Act did not apply, a lot of asylum seekers would fall within that category of illegal foreigners, because when they flee their countries of origin, you know, they're coming with basically nothing, essentially the clothes on their backs or whatever they have at the time that they fled their country of origin. So many of them don't have passports, they don't have travel documents, so when they do enter the country through a port of entry, they don't have a travel document, and you'll find that a lot of asylum seekers enter the country illegally because they're afraid that if they go through a port of entry, they will be arrested. So essentially what is supposed to happen is that when a person reaches a port of entry and they tell the border officials or the officials at the port of entry that they are intending to apply for asylum, whether they're documented or not, they should be allowed into the country and they should be given the chance to apply for asylum. But this doesn't always happen, and we've seen it playing out quite a lot since the South African borders opened once the COVID pandemic quieted down a bit. So what we have noted is that many of our clients are arrested regardless of whether they have valid documentation or whether they have declared their intention to apply for asylum. So a police officer will go up to someone and they'll say, hey, can I see your document? And if the person fails to produce valid documentation, they will be arrested. If they produce valid documentation, but it's an asylum seeker or a refugee permit, they will still be arrested because the police say that, oh, it could be fake, so we just need to verify that you have a real permit. So regardless of whether a person has documentation or not, these days everyone is being arrested, and that is unfortunate because it means that no one is immune from the actions of the police. Okay. So LHR generally, in our detention monitoring unit and our penal reform unit, we try to intervene in as many immigration detention cases as we can. So the people that we normally assist are asylum seekers and refugees whose applications have been rejected and are still to go on review or appeal at the standing committee. We assist asylum seekers and refugees whose permits have expired but they've not been able to renew them on time. We assist newcomers who have declared their intention to apply for asylum but were arrested and detained anyway. And we assist failed asylum seekers, so people whose applications have been finally rejected, if they have a valid claim that we can take to the courts. So immigration detention can occur anywhere, but like I said before, there are places that police officials know are frequented by migrants, and those places are usually patrolled by the police and they arrest people on a weekly basis without fail. If the person does have documentation, the process is pretty straightforward. We will go to the police station where they are being held. we will talk to the sergeant and present the valid permit and ask that our client be released. If this fails and the client is charged, then we will speak to the prosecutor and request a postponement so that we can make representations so that the person can be released. If this fails and we have to go to court, we will present the valid permit of the person to the magistrate and say, this person is documented, can the charges be dropped? If the magistrate says that the permit must be verified by Home Affairs, then we do a formal bail hearing, and then we wait until the permit has been verified, just to ensure that the person is not detained while the permit is being verified. We also assist with people who are being held for deportation purposes. Unfortunately, there are people who are arrested to be deported who should not be deported because they do not fall within that definition of illegal foreigner. So at Lindela, which is a repatriation center just outside of Joburg, you'll find that there are immigrants who have valid documentation, but because they did not have it on them at the time that they were arrested, they will be taken to Lindela. Or you'll find that a newcomer who maybe did not understand English and was unable to explain that they wanted to apply for asylum is arrested and taken to Lindela. Or you'll find that someone who has been finally rejected but who has a good claim that can be taken on judicial review will be taken to Lindela. So those are the type of people that we try to assist, because as Lindo mentioned, the principle of non-refoulement is very important, and we're trying to make sure that no person is sent back to their country if they're going to face persecution there. And it's very, very important for our clients, for everyone, in fact, to be aware of their rights in terms of the Constitution and in terms of legislation in general, so that when they're put in a situation like that and they can't access organizations such as our organization or any other NGOs, they're able to exercise their rights, they're able to advocate for their own rights, and they're able to navigate the legal system without legal assistance. So